Hey Chalinda, thank you so much for joining. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Gaurav. Hope everyone's doing well there, and then it's nice to be here.
Absolutely. God's grace, I think everything is going really well. Things are settling down, and yet there is some kind of disturbance in the outside world because of the current situation that the world is into.
Yeah, I think everyone's as good as anyone can be in 2020. So you learn to roll with the punches.
Precisely, precisely. So, Chalinda, would love to hear from you if you can just share something from your initial years and how did you get started with the startup world?
Right. Very briefly, I think I graduated in 2009. Very significant year for everyone here in Sri Lanka. One, because we just ended the 30 plus year civil war. And at the same time, you also had the financial crisis that, took place and the after effects of that. So it was an interesting period, first time, very safe to say in the country, you don't have to really think about, leaving the country or, worry about too much about, your safety and all of that. But at the same time, you had this economic challenge due to the financial crisis. So I started in 2010 and I initially started at the ICT Agency of Sri Lanka, which is the apex body for all government ICT policy direction for the country. And I was attached to private sector development arm of ICTA. So when I was there, I was keen on trying to see what we can do to help innovation, help people to start company. And that was the initial starting point in terms of getting into entrepreneurship. It wasn't a case where, we read about entrepreneurs or we saw it and we always wanted to be an entrepreneur. The personal problem that I faced was after graduating I spent about good 6 to 8 months just looking for a job, and then the painful cycle of that. And then once I did get into the government, I want to see how we can create more and more companies. And that's how it kind of initially started. I think thinking of it from an entrepreneur standpoint or startup standpoint came afterwards. Initially it was just trying to see how we knew that there were a lot of people with ideas. We knew there were people with had innovative products or have invented. How do we support these people? What kind of support do they need to kind of take it beyond an idea or take it beyond an invention? And that was a starting point.
And that's how the new world opened up for you.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
it's a very different identity, right? So when you just pass out from your college and then you suddenly realize that I would like to play with, I would like to dabble with this new identity called being an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
So how did you find your feet in the ground? And then I also understand that you were a part of Spiral Nation.
yeah.
So very curious, tell me about that chapter of your life.
So the interesting thing, it wasn't there anything before, right? There wasn't any programs for entrepreneurship. There wasn't any program for startups. We just heard the word incubator, right? And I remember in the West, you were seeing hackathons. Even in 2010, if you looked at the dictionary, back then we were still using a physical dictionary. You wouldn't find the word hackathon as a definition, right? So when we realize, okay, this is what a hackathon is, and when we want to do the same thing or replicate it here in Sri Lanka, a lot of people did that. They start trying to find out what this word hackathon means, and then there was no definition for it. So we had to explain to people what it was. Um, I always prefer to do new things purely because even if you fail, and you will fail multiple times doing it, uh, there's nobody to judge you, right? There's no preconceived knowledge that you can kind of benchmark. So whatever that you do is you're doing it. And I like that. I've always liked that from childhood, just to do new things. So we started promoting on. It wasn't promoting entrepreneurship per se. We were trying to encourage people who had ideas to convert those ideas into a business. That was the whole goal. And everyone went we went to universities, we met the university students. I can't call them kids because they were probably a couple of years younger to me. And we saw that their ideas were great, and it can be a standalone business, and we wanted them to continue that idea into a company. And they would essentially want a job. Why would you start a company, go through that all that hassle? I just want a job. I've proven you that I can do this. That was their mentality. So then that's when we created the program. Yeah, we created the program called Spiralation, which essentially is spiral of innovation. Spiral was taken from, I think during that time, we were moving from a waterfall method to, software engineering jargon, right? So waterfall methods to, more agile, and one of the processes was spiral. And then we combined that with innovation, and that's how Spiralation came. And that was essentially the government giving a grant of, at that time, about $5,000. Because we were part of government, we were also able to reach out to a lot more other people to support us, both local and overseas. I remember we had Boston University and Microsoft came in. Microsoft, in fact, launched their BizSpark program here in Sri Lanka, and we were the first South Asian country. So BizSpark was not even, available in India at that time. They saw that what we were trying to do, and they were like, yes, we will make it available. This was very early 2010. So we had Intel. At the time, Johnny Davis, who was a VP of Intel, actually flew to Sri Lanka to launch this initiative. And it was, yes, we were giving a grant of $5,000 to encourage, but at the same time we had different organizations, different people coming in to help entrepreneurs. I wouldn't call them entrepreneurs. I mean, looking back, they just had ideas. Yes, we had to teach them what entrepreneurship is also about. And that's how it started, essentially.
As I'm just listening to you, I'm finding it so fascinating, so interesting. It's like, we are curating a complete movie. So people are flying in from different parts of the world. Boston University is investing, Microsoft is interested, and the government is coming together. It's like, man, you created a revolution in Sri Lanka. How was it for you?
I think it was fun. Initially when doing all these things, it was very, very fun. Meeting different types of people, having chats. I remember I used to even, speak to people, like aspiring entrepreneurs, parents, because the parents wanted the kids to go and work for government or get a stable job. But then we realized that, okay, no, this guy has, or girl has some, crazy idea, which we feel that there is potential. So then they would like, oh, I don't mind doing this, but then my parents want me to get a stable job or go work for the government. So then we even went and, met with some parents and tried to educate them as well. So it was extremely fun being, you're not really looking at about, where is this going to go? None of that, right? It's about how do we bring people together. Even at that time, I remember even university students, because we were just coming out of that whole civil war situation, you only interacted with the 10 people that you wouldn't even go and, meet or speak to some random person, even from a different university. Not because you are afraid of them, being a terrorist or anything like that. It's just that it was not in our. So we were very closely guarded. That's how we grew up.
I mean, it's not there in the visibility as well. I don't know even if it exists. So how would I reach out to them? Yeah.
Exactly. So there was no. So I remember, we did this. The one of the largest hackathons at the time, where we had I think about 100+ people coming in from all parts of the country, and we had it in a university which is in the central part of Sri Lanka, which is one of the largest universities. So you had people who are coming from Jaffna. Some of these people came or left Jaffna for the first time in their entire life, right? And it was a 3-day hackathon. And this, how it started was, I actually went to Mumbai and took part in Startup Weekend, the first Startup Weekend that happened in Mumbai. The very first startup weekend
Wow.
that happened in India happened in Bangalore.
Hmm.
And that was January 2011, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Pankaj Jain, who's went to 500 startups and now a big VC and thought leader in the space. He was actually the one who organized it. I couldn't go for the January one, so in February I went to the Mumbai one. So we had that experience. We loved it. We're like, wow, we need to do this in Sri Lanka, and that's how we started. And I remember
Wow.
on the third day, we had this group of students who came to us and they were thanking for putting up this environment. And before we started the hackathon, we said that everybody needs to introduce themselves to each other. And until people did that, we were not going to start the program, because they came with their friends and that was their team. They didn't want to mingle with everyone else. We said, nothing doing. You can't be in your team. You have to go and introduce yourself to everyone. And then you need to pair up with different people. So we
Beautiful.
forced that. We forced that on them. And I remember on the third day, this couple of girls came and one of them was saying, I met, and the university also gave lodging for all these students, all 100 plus people. They said, this is my new best friend. She's from a different university. And the girl who was speaking to me was from Jaffna, and she was, Tamil. And she was saying, this is my first Sinhalese friend.
Wow. It's a new world opening up for
Yeah, for them.
everyone who's going through that.
Exactly. So this is my first Sinhala friend, and everything I knew about, Sinhala people was very different. Everything that I've, grown up listening to is very different. And, they were thanking. Now, this is something that, this was not our intention. Our intention was to have a hackathon, get teams to build products and, celebrate. Nothing to do with, communal, whatever, reconciliation. But that was the biggest outcome.
You
That
were
was a
creating.
byproduct. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that byproduct became the most important thing for everyone who was there. And I think that was pretty much a turning point for me to really say, okay, this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
for the next 10, 15 years, because
Beautiful.
this is where I like it.
Would love to get into that path, but before that, I'm just taking one step backwards.
Sure.
Now, when you are convincing people to get into something which is very new, you
Right.
come across a lot of challenges.
Yes.
And how did you manage to convince those so-called entrepreneurs? Let me
Right.
not use the word entrepreneurs right now.
Yeah.
So-called people with ideas.
Right.
So how did you manage to convince them to look at this new world called startup rather than joining a bank or joining an organization or
Safe.
joining a safe environment? So how did you manage to convince them?
Good question. I think it was just us going and talking every day, preaching about it, at that time. Even 2010, even companies like even Facebook was slightly larger, but then everything else like Uber or, WhatsApp didn't exist. None of these big companies, Airbnb just started. So we haven't really heard of these things. So we didn't have even success stories from the West also to kind of leverage. But we did have a few, the Microsofts, the Googles, and so that the first generation or whatever. So it was mainly using that. And I think the next part of it was the fact that we had this massive faculty of people, very successful business professionals, overseas companies like Microsoft and all of them being there with us really helped build confidence in it. And even to this day, when I speak with entrepreneurs, for me, it's never about selling entrepreneurship. You can't sell entrepreneurship. You need to have it in you. You need to realize that you want to do something, right? It's not a commodity, or rather, I don't see it as being a commodity that can be sold. They need to come. It has to be internalized, and you need to kind of create that environment and facilitate that thinking for that individual. And if they realize it, brilliant. And And the challenge part is that if you do it for 100 people, each person will get it at different times.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
let's say you do a training workshop or whatever session for 100 people. When you start measuring your results, let's say 1 month, you're not going to see much. 1 year, you might see some years. But then when you start measuring them, 5 years or 10 years later, then you see a lot more conversion happening. And I see that now as well. Some of the people that I met, 10 years ago, they're now coming out.
Hmm.
So we encourage them. It didn't work out. They would have gone and gotten a job or whatever, but they now still reach out and say, you know what, now I think I'm ready.
Yeah.
And I understand what you guys are doing. And that's fine. That's how it is.
So, Chalinda, what do you think? What are those initial sparks that one can notice that this person has the seeds of being an entrepreneur? If there's any common thread that you've been able to identify.
The best ones do a lot of work, right? I have like a portfolio of companies, and one of the key things that I look at is how much of work have they done into understanding the problem prior to deciding that they want to be an entrepreneur. For an example, there's an entrepreneur, is in the education space. He's built this kind of like a ERP for schools and tuition classes and all of that. And before he started doing everything, and he's older than me at least. For 3 months over the weekend, he has enrolled in a tuition class. This grown man essentially shaved and gone as a student to a private tuition class just to understand the problem. Um, and I see everyone who has done that legwork, who has done that piece, that is important.
This reminds me, I was talking to another entrepreneur, a very seasoned entrepreneur in India, and he said something really beautiful. And it's absolutely in the lines of what you are talking about. What he said is that the initial spark that he has been able to notice is that these people are not, they don't just identify a problem. They are obsessed with finding a solution to that problem that they really care for.
Yeah.
And as I'm
That,
just listening to you, the kind of initial work that one has done, it makes a lot of difference.
yeah. Actually, I'll just take a step forward on that. I think that's beautiful. That's perfect. What they're actually also obsessed is about the problem. See, the more you understand the problem, uh, you start getting so many solutions for it. So if you are obsessed with the solution, what happens is, you think that the solution is the most important thing, and you always try to push that forward, which is not the case. Simple example: if you are having a headache, uh, that's a problem. Your immediate solution is to take, Panadol. But if you go a step further and ask, why do you have headache? Maybe you have, low blood pressure. Then your solution is to take medicine to lower your blood pressure. You can go further and ask, why do you have low blood pressure? Maybe your salt intake might not be enough. I'm just saying, right? Then you change your salt in. So you see, every time you ask, you can ask n number of whys, and at each stage, the solution is different. So for them, all of these guys are so obsessed with the problem, and they say different, how the problem, how it's related to you versus to me, it's different. And then they want to see how they can, serve both of us.
Yeah, yeah. So, Chalinda, out of just curiosity, what do you think? What are the initial challenges faced by the early startup companies, the early phased startups, if I may put it?
I think there's a lot of, the main challenge is essentially, how do you know you're solving the right problem? That's a lot hard. It's a classic example of, this picture of this iceberg where you see the top and majority of it is below the water. It's similar to that, right? When everyone sees problems, but then, is that the core problem, or is it the real problem is beneath? So identifying that is, I would say, the biggest challenge. And everybody sees the most obvious part and start chasing that, and sometimes it's not the problem. So ended up wasting time, money, effort, all of that. In addition to that, when you're an entrepreneur, I think everything is a challenge. You know, I don't think anything comes easy, right? Every single thing is a challenge, and as an entrepreneur, you will always have um, the amount of resources that you have access to will always be much lower than what is required from you.
Or what
So
you would expect.
expect, no, not just that, it's about the things that you need to do. um, so what happens is you need to be bootstrapped in terms of every single thing. People use this word bootstrap in a very loosely manner, meaning that you don't spend, but you have to bootstrap in the way that you hire people or the way you work, how do you manage your time to everything. But a lot of these people one of the things that I've been in corporate as well. I've worked in government, I've worked in corporate, I've worked in startups. um, I don't thrive in that work. I love that uncertainty, I like that pressure. That's what gets me going. And most entrepreneurs have a similar uh, mindset as well.
They love uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah. They thrive when they are taking risk. They thrive when there's a lot of ambiguity all around.
Yeah.
That's what give them a
Yeah,
probably that's
and
what
after a
gives them a
while you
kick.
get used. Yeah, after a while you get used to it, right? You
Yeah.
learn how to manage things.
Mhm. Fantastic. So thank you so much, Chalinda. Let's take the next step into your life journey as well. So what happened after 2011 and 12?
Well, I was running the program. Obviously entrepreneurship, took off from there very, very fast. A lot of other people joined the bandwagon, investors, angel networks, different corporates started doing work. But the initials, I was there for about 4.5 years at ICTA, and it was always about promoting entrepreneurship. You know, the essentially, what we were doing is, you before that you had two options: you either get a job or you leave the country. Those were the only two options that people had. And now you had this third option where you could start your own company. So from an economic standpoint, going from two options to three options is a significant value addition, or leapfrog. So once that was done, I was obsessed in terms of building companies, because I realized that it's not so much about you can have all the support people, you can have grants and all of that, you still fail. So even if you look at now, the startup failure rate is quite high, significantly. I was obsessed is, how do you reduce that? What are the things that you can do to kind of reduce these things? So then there
Reduce
was,
the percentage of failures that you may encounter
yeah, yeah,
in the growth path. Okay.
good part. So then at the time there was a corporate, there's a company called Brandix, which is also there in India as well, in Vizag. It's one of the largest apparel exporters in Sri Lanka. So they were setting up an accelerator to support technology companies building solution for the clothing industry. So that was very specific, not for any other industry, but for the clothing industry. So when they were setting that up, I joined with them, and I joined in terms of running that accelerator. And that's where my corporate exposure comes from, trying to understand how corporates think. A lot of a lot of people with high intellectual horsepower running $1 billion company, how do
Mm,
they think, how do they make decisions? So that
mm,
was a great experience.
yeah.
And then helping companies in that space.
So when you joined this organization, how did your role shift from when you were working with Spiral Nation to this organization?
So with the government, the work that I was doing with Spiralation was, I would say, about 50% of my time. I also used to do a lot of other work, because ICT as an organization, like I said, it's ICT policy, so you can't just work on one. I was working on country promotion, so I used to promote Sri Lanka as a destination, and I've done delegations to Africa, to Australia, and then wherever, India. We used to come for a lot of NASCOM events. I was doing a lot more other work in terms of helping mature companies, mature IT companies, get quality certifications, ISO, CMMI, all of that. So when I shifted here, I was fully focused on entrepreneurs. So that was the main reason for me to shift, not because I didn't like what I did. I just realized that this is something that I want to do full time, and I just said, look, this is where I want to focus. So it was full time on entrepreneurship, and then it was also focused on a specific domain. So I had to learn about the domain, the clothing or the apparel industry,
Yeah,
where are the
yeah.
opportunities and all of that. So that's how it changed.
Great. Thank you, Chalinda. Chalinda, you also spoke about investing and investors and the stakeholders. Now, very curious, of all the work that you have done, what do you think is the major challenge that an entrepreneur faces while he's asking for funding from the investors?
Depending on the stage, I would say. So early stage is where I focus on. The biggest challenge, as I see, from an investor standpoint, I always feel that there are no bad ideas. Every idea is good. And I think every idea has potential. Obviously, you'll have to make certain tweaks here and there. And you'll always find, ways to get to the market and make money. I think one of the main challenges is the managing the expectation, right? So if I'm an investor, if I'm putting in capital, I have a certain expectation of the trajectory of the company, the growth, revenue, my multiple return, all of that. And then the entrepreneur will have that. So how do you get these things to coincide? That's a challenge. Because as an entrepreneur, your startup is your baby. It's like
Yeah.
giving birth, right? It's your child, and you're very guarded about the way how you want to bring up your child.
Or how much equity that I may want to dilute.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to understand it is think of it as your child. Uh, you don't want other people who have raised children coming and giving you ideas on how to raise your kids.
Hmm.
People don't like that, right? And people who haven't had kids really have the best ideas for parents as well, right? How it is. So it's very much similar. Getting this two views, that's one of the main challenge. The other challenge is, especially from a technology standpoint, one of the things that I'm focusing more nowadays is financial literacy. As an entrepreneur, you need to be able to manage capital.
Hmm.
Raising is one thing. Once you raise that capital, you need to have the knowledge of managing that money, which is, having somebody else's money is a lot of, it's a burden in a way.
It's a responsibility. It's a huge responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility. You can't just, go and do and say, if it doesn't work, all right, 90% of startups fail. You're an angel investor. Investors need to learn how. I mean, you can't say that. So that is, I think those are the more complex challenges. Everything else is, yes, it is a challenge, but you can relatively very straightforward ways of solving them. Even the equity and valuations and all of that, yeah, you can, there's ways to solve it. There are mechanisms, whether it's legally or mathematically, you can solve it. But solving that whole responsibility side of it, right? And then as an entrepreneur, putting your company first and not yourself, right? So I come, Gaurav, I need $1 million. You give me $1 million, but then I need to do what's best for the company with that $1 million, not what's best for me or what I feel. So I am always in that decision-making process. Am I being, subjective? Is there, moral hazard in terms of,
So true.
So those are the things which are, slightly more complicated. And I think that's why fundraising is challenging. That's why, startup is a challenging space to be in.
Yeah. Also, Chalinda, what I've experienced is people take pride. In fact, these days, it has become a very important criteria that if this startup has been able to raise fund, And people take it a lot of pride in saying that, you know what, my startup has been funded by so and so, and or people take pride in saying that, no, I'm the founder of two failed startups, or I fired this person or that person. What are your views on that?
Honestly, nothing. I mean, look, people, you fundraising, see, your pride comes from the fact that it's extremely hard. If you look at any article, whether it's in India or Sri Lanka or the US, any country, they will write an article when there is fundraising done, but no article covers how many investors they spoke to,
Precisely.
right? And they probably, spoke to hundreds of people. They probably got shut down from hundreds of people. A lot of people probably told them to, get lost, would have been rude to them. So when you finally raise capital, I think, that's a reason for you to be proud of, because
Mm.
I mean, being an entrepreneur, you have to be insane, right? You're literally insane, otherwise why would you take on all of these risks and go down this crazy path?
Hmm.
And getting funded is sort of like an indicator that, yes, you might be insane, but there is value in your insanity.
There's
uh,
something going right in the path that you've chosen for yourself.
yeah,
It may or may not lead you to where you would like to be.
yeah, but somebody else believes in you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's and people, as humans, you every human wants to be relevant, right? Wants to be important to
That's a
someone.
that's a basic desire
That's a basic desire. So if
and a basic need.
yeah, so if you come and say, look, I think what you are doing is good, I want to fund you, I mean, that's natural. I think there's nothing wrong with it.
Hmm.
Obviously people have used it for various negative reasons as well, but that's the case with anything. When you are given an opportunity, you can use it for the good of, or you can use it for
Your own
the bad.
benefit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for the bad as well.
yeah.
So I think it's fine. And as long as it gets the work done, that's all that matters.
Hmm. Okay. So for how long did you work with the same organization in the apparel industry?
I was there for about 2.5 years. Yeah, I was there
Okay.
from 2014 to 2016.
Mhm.
Uh,
And then?
and then I left that organization. There was, I met so many people during that time, and there were a few key people who were setting up a new company, which was for equity crowdfunding. And then I joined them to run that particular company. So the main reason for me to join was I understood the building side of it. The main reason was I saw the growth of other industries, agriculture, fintech, and because I was focused on the apparel industry, I couldn't get involved in various these other companies.
Hmm.
And being in that space, and I realized a lot of companies were coming out, and their main challenge was um, fundraising. We didn't have angel investors. There wasn't that whole space here in Sri
Hmm.
Lanka. So I was like, okay, this is a challenge that I want to take, and that was the reason for me to join that organization.
Hmm. So if you look at this phase of your life, what was the key takeaway? What was the key learning that still helps you to grow and continue to sustain and strive for what you really care for?
The key learning is, I think, I met a lot more entrepreneurs. So actually, no, let me put it this way. I was able to understand what a real startup is like. So,
Hmm.
so essentially, if you look at it from a language standpoint, if a new company is also called a startup, if somebody
Hmm.
goes and registered, right? But from an investment standpoint, from the technology in the domain that we are, startup is something different. It's from design scale, from birth itself, design to scale. Then you have lifestyle businesses, all of that. Nowadays, even if somebody opens up a cupcake business, they are also called a startup. From a language perspective, that's fine, but from an investment and what we try to do, that's different, right?
So
May
what do you mean by real startup? Of course, a new company which is just starting up would call themselves startup. So when
Yeah,
you're
which
saying
is fine.
real startup, from the investor's point of view, design point of view, curating a product together, putting it together.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So the ones that, I mean, when I say real startup, the ones that what I meant is how we define a startup as investors. We are looking at companies that can grow exponentially very fast. And it serves multiple customer segments. It's a company that can go outside of Sri Lanka, either to the region or globally. The typical, you're benchmarking yourself along the lines of Facebook or whatever it
Yeah,
is.
what I'm listening is scalability and expansion.
Yeah,
They're the two very important uh, pillars
correct.
of a startup.
Yeah, so those are the ones. And most of the time, the other key learning was there were many companies that I met which they had a product which had the potential to scale even outside of Sri Lanka, and even to India there was potential. But the founder was not really keen on doing it, right? The founder was happy with his company, running it 8 to 5, have his weekends for his family. And that's the beauty of Sri Lanka. The work-life balance here is much more. It's a very family-oriented culture that we have. But when you're building a startup, you're literally slaving away 14, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly building. So I met a lot of entrepreneurs who had great ideas and they had the potential, but they were not really prepared as individuals to make that sacrifice to take it to that next level. And that's perfectly fine. And I tell them, look, what you're doing is completely fine. You should do this. But then it's not something that we would invest in because we are not the right partner for you.
Hmm.
And don't even go and raise money from investors because you will become very unhappy, because the investors, the moment they put in money, they're going to chase up. And
Yeah.
that's natural, right? And because they want to safeguard their interest, but then you want to spend time with your family, go on vacations and trips and all of that, and it's just going to get ugly. So that was the main learning point.
Just curious, Chalinda. One thing that I'm listening is that so-called entrepreneurs of the real startups that we are talking about, one of the common threads is there's a need for scale, there's a need for expansion. They're willing to invest a lot of time, they're willing to sacrifice a lot of things. They know that things might get ugly and they're willing to face the challenge. They're willing to put in all the hard work, everything, the sweat and the blood that they have into the work that they are doing. So that's a common thread. Is there any other common thread that you've been able to identify since you have worked with
See
entrepreneurs
the
from different
common
parts
thread,
of the world?
yeah. So the common thread is that's why I said they are obsessed with the problem,
Hmm.
right? So they are obsessed about solving the problem, not just to their immediate community, not to the only to the immediate society and just immediate country. They want to solve the problem for anyone who faces it.
Hmm.
So whether that
Hmm.
person is Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or the US, they don't really care
Hmm.
where they are. They just want to solve the problem,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And that's a common thread.
So they're not stuck with any kind of identity. They're just focused and obsessed with the problem.
Yeah, they're just continuously obsessed. Even if you look at the biggest companies like a Google or whatever, they're still obsessed about organizing information.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what drives them. you know
Yeah.
Facebook is obsessed about connecting people, right? I mean, the great example is if you look at, Facebook wanted to connect different people. And when it was launched in Sri Lanka, or when it was made available, that was really great because we had friends who left the country and we never knew about them. And all of a sudden we could connect with them through Facebook, and now we are seeing pictures of Australia. Even though we haven't flown to Australia, we are seeing pictures in the US because now we are connected. But if you go to a rural part of Sri Lanka or even in India, that community is still there. So why do they need to connect with each other? They meet on a daily basis. They don't have people who live outside their network. But then that connectivity is something different,
Yeah. So
right?
just curious, Chalinda here. Now, with everything going on in the world, there's so much of information already available. Why do uh, startups fail? More than that, why do entrepreneurs fail?
I don't think it's also about how do you define success and failure, right? If it's not binary, and I think that's why I don't agree with how some of these definitions or some of these articles are, written. They say, okay, if you don't raise capital, you are a failure,
Precisely, that's exactly what my question is.
right?
Because
I
people
don't.
are obsessed with that, this startup is successful because it has been able to raise the funding, or the evaluation is so folds has gone up. So,
Yeah, so I mean, with regards to funding does not guarantee success.
hmm,
That you can make certain assumptions and certain correlations that it might lead to success, but it certainly doesn't guarantee success. And not being able to raise capital also doesn't determine that you're a failure. You can still companies like Mailchimp, or even Zoho never raised outside capital. They're all bootstrapped companies, and they built. Uh, I mean, Zoho is huge, not just in India. It's huge as a global, product,
mhm,
and there's no outside capital in that
hmm,
organization. Same thing with Mailchimp. So you don't need to. It's just
hmm,
a faster way of getting into it. So define you as long as you can define what success and what failure is,
hmm,
you're good. and
yeah,
and for me, yes, there have been many failures where the products didn't work,
hmm,
company didn't work, we had to shut it down. But what I have learned is I've learned so much of lessons, whether it whether a lot of information about the market. There's a lot of tacit knowledge and primary data which now I use in other instances. So all that experiences add value for the next company, right? And that's how you get closer. So that's why, I mean, I don't know, can you even talk about, you say that entrepreneurship is a journey, and then people say that, I agree, and then they also talk about success and failure. So how can success and failure fits in a journey?
and that too specifically, how can you define success or failure with a phase of journey? Because the
Yes,
person has not even walked that path completely.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
that's why it doesn't fit in, right? It's like your life is a journey.
yeah.
Someday you'll die. So is dying a failure?
You know,
Not.
this is really interesting, Chalinda, what you just mentioned, because it's not only making me contemplate and reflect and revisit the thought of success and failure in the context of startup, but it's making me relook at the way I define success and failure in the context of my life. So there's
Yeah,
nothing called failure, there's nothing called success.
yeah. I mean, there are circumstances, you make decisions. Some will go your way, some will not, and you go ahead. That's um, and I think increasingly, even I'll give you a good example. Nothing to do with startups. So I hope I'm not diverting too much.
Please go ahead.
This we had Sri Lanka had the world's first female prime minister in 1960,
Hmm.
and then the US elections were there, so Kamala Harris was there, and there was a lot of, and then people started saying no, yes she is, but then they started comparing, and some people are saying she was part of an elite, or she was 1% of Sri Lanka, the richest high, that's why she became prime minister, and so on and so forth, right? See, the way I see it, there are many privileges. There are n number of privileges in this world, right? And each person have access to multiple privileges,
Yes.
right? The basic common privilege that all of us have is, you and I have is, we are born, we are human, and we have all our limbs, you know, in that way. But you
Yeah.
have people who are born who might be, disabled from birth. They have, they don't even have the basic privilege that you and I have,
Hmm.
right? And if you are gonna criticize or belittle someone just because they have a different set of privileges than you're not doing anyone any service, right? If you're saying that, the only reason why he or she went ahead in life because they were born to a richer family,
Absolutely. You've
right?
nailed it.
Success is also like that, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
always comparing with someone.
Yeah.
As long as you compare it with yourself, and if you are ahead um, in life, in your startup today than you were yesterday, then it's good. That's why sometimes too much information is also, if the information is garbage, then your thought process is also garbage.
I often share with people that we all are privileged, born in a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And if you look at, we all are absolutely privileged. The very fact that you're talking about we are human beings, so that means we are privileged. And
Sure.
all of us, when somebody says, "No, what? I'm born in a dysfunctional family," and I really doubt and really question everyone around, aren't we all born in some or the other dysfunctional
Yeah.
families?
We just have different ways. That's it, right? And
Absolutely.
we all have to run the same race. So you can not run and complain saying, oh, so and so has a head start because they had X and Y privileges. You can complain about it and not run. That's up to you.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
Or you can just choose to run. That's it.
Yeah. So, Chalinda, what do you think? What are the other myths in the startup world that you may want to touch upon?
I see a lot of entrepreneurs start startups where success is already recognized. That is why a lot of people are drawn into e-commerce, fintech. That's why these are trends, right? You're drawn into it. You see other people succeeding and you want to be there. That's why you don't find entrepreneurs, doing renewable energy as opposed to the number of entrepreneurs getting into e-commerce. Because
Right now?
yeah, it's hard, or biomedical, or something of that, because you don't see success there.
Hmm.
So that's why success is important, right? It's human nature. You will go where success is. Um, so this whole myth about if you follow the path, you will also end up in a similar place is a myth.
Yeah.
Because even if you mirror the same steps that any Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, or anyone, or Byju's, and Byju is a very famous person. Even if you mirror that, you're not gonna end up in that level, because there are a lot of things that we
Other
don't,
factors
other factors, right? Um,
which the
so
media has not even spoken about.
yeah, I mean, it's not right. A lot of people don't wanna uh, talk about their personal things. It's personal. That's why it's called personal. Um, so I think that's the other part of it. I think a lot of people don't experiment whether they are ready for it.
Hmm.
That self-actualization side of it, reflect upon, okay, is this something that I want to do? And now, because it's a very trendy thing to be an entrepreneur, there's a lot of peer pressure. Your best
Yeah.
friend is an entrepreneur, your so and so is an entrepreneur. Now you feel that peer pressure is self-inflicted.
Yeah.
I tell people you should just go and work for a company, because you learn so many things, managing
Hmm.
people. And it's good to get an income, steady income monthly, adjust your lifestyle a bit, meet different people, network people with,
Yeah.
outside your network. All that is there.
And and being an employee is no way lesser than being an entrepreneur
Oh,
or an
yeah,
employer.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Chalinda, what do you think? If you were to state a few principles which are extremely important for an entrepreneur,
Right.
uh, where would you begin and how would you state that?
In terms of principles, there's no shortcut, you know, and it's extremely being an entrepreneur is also a very lonely
Hmm.
journey, right? You might be surrounded by so many people, but most of the time the decisions that you have to take and all of these are very, very tough decisions.
Hmm.
um, so in terms of principle, I think the main thing I would always tell people is just make sure whatever that you absolutely believe in what you're doing and you're putting 100%.
mm,
And even if you are 99.9%, then don't do it. It's not
mm,
worth it, right?
mm.
Unless you have that conviction in yourself. um, and even if, because, and that's why I don't have any regrets. Whatever that I've done, I put in 110. Even if it didn't work, I'm still fine, because now I don't have the regret of not. Otherwise, if I had just put 99% of my effort just
Mm.
because there was a risk of failure or whatever, even if I failed, then I would have always thought, would it made a difference if I put in that 1%?
So at least you'll not have any regret.
No regrets. Yeah, just do whatever, and then it's a daily thing. It's about showing up and executing no matter what.
So, Chalinda, who has been your inspiration? I mean, who do you look up to seek guidance, to get inspiration, to get
Uh,
motivated, to pick up your broken threads and fragmented pieces every time when you experience some kind of so-called failure or some kind of so-called learning?
right. I've had a few mentors over the years. Um, I now have a few people that I would speak to, work related, if I had to make certain decisions and so on, but not on a regular basis kind of thing. I know I have about 2 or 3 people that I can always pick up the phone, call, and say, look, I need to have a chat with you,
Hmm,
and they're fine. And in addition to that, I think what has happened now is I've also have a good set of friends
hmm,
because of the work ethics, the way that we've done. You attract certain people who are with your vibe. I don't know how to
yeah.
call it.
I mean, who are vibrating at the same level of consciousness.
Yeah, same
That's how
frequency.
I, yeah.
Yeah, same frequency, right? And among them, you can just say whatever that you have to say, and that they're not going to judge,
Hmm,
and they will always help. And I think that is important. So this set of, so I have, um, I would say, about 3 sets of friends. So you have your school friends,
hmm,
that's completely unwind. That has nothing to do with entrepreneurship, nothing. Then you have your uni friends, again, nothing to do with the work or whatever. And then these are work colleagues. So then we're not part of, we never work for the same organization. It's just that over the years we met, and we believe in the same principles. We have the same ethos when it comes to the work that we do and why
hmm,
we do it. And that's why we are there. And most of the time, it's just a casual conversation.
hmm.
It's not say, okay, let's get together and try to solve each other's problem.
No,
It's not that. It's very, fluid and open in that sense.
yeah. But is there any particular entrepreneur or an investor that you seek inspiration from? You may not be in touch with them, you may not have met that person, but somebody that you really look up to the way he takes decision or the way he or she.
I love everyone from Sam Altman, Paul Graham. There's another person called Gary,
Hmm,
uh, not Vaynerchuk, but was part of company. He actually, a company that was funded by Y Combinator and it failed, but now
hmm,
he has. So I have people that I listen to podcasts
hmm.
uh, and all of that, and and I like the way that they think. It's different.
Yeah,
Uh, and my advice to even my portfolio of companies and for anybody is also to don't limit yourself to the usual suspects. Don't read the same books, don't follow the same people. Just follow random people as well that are not popular or
yeah.
that are not part of the mainstream, because that's the only way that you can think
Broaden,
different. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
broaden your scope of thinking. You know,
Exactly.
one of my friends, she always used to tell me that, hey, unless you've got the understanding of multidisciplines in life, you'll not be able to bring something
Yeah.
that is off the mill, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
Chalinda, here is my question. So you have been an entrepreneur, you've worked with government, you've worked with startups, you've worked in the domain where you interacted with investors and funders. You've worked in corporates as well. So today, if you were to take a pause and define and describe yourself, where would you begin and how would you do that?
I think my purpose is in building companies or helping people build companies, better companies. um, and and the core of it is, yes, helping with their business model, connecting them with the investors, that is the core. But in addition, I spend a lot of time speaking to entrepreneurs uh, about other things than their business, about just random, their challenges at family, maybe because when you're an entrepreneur, or maybe it's about what do they used to do, traveling. Some of these guys used to camp and do all of that, but now they haven't gone out or traveled in several years, right? And just casual. So I enjoy that a lot about. And I also spend a lot of time speaking to them about how they go about solving the problem. How did they speak to the customer? What was their tone? The real nitty gritties. How did you present the problem? How was their reaction? Can we learn something from their body language, and based on that change our approach? So I'm very interested in that human piece. Not that I study that part of it. It's just I realize that the way you can get anybody to say yes just by changing the way that you frame the question, by changing the way you ask the question, all of that. So that's the other part. So but in terms of purpose is, I would say, two sides. One is to help build companies, and the additional approach right now is to help build very scalable companies. So I started off as very broad focus, entrepreneurship, very wide.
Hmm.
Started narrowing it down to industries, whether it's apparel, whether it's fintech, agriculture, whatever. Now it's even more, I don't care whether you're a fintech or a agri or education or whatever.
Hmm.
Are you building something which can be scalable outside? Then I'm interested in you. I'm
Beautiful.
not saying that, I'm not saying that the others are irrelevant. It's just that, it, for me, taking a company out, building it, bringing it to like a Byju's or a Flipkart, or that's where my passion is.
Yeah.
And if you want to build a nice lifestyle business or an SME for yourself, there's plenty of other people who will help you, and both of us will not sink, because I'm going to push you, and eventually you're going to get pissed off with me, and I wouldn't rather have that.
Yeah. So, now as you are at this phase of your life, what do you know for sure with 100% certainty and surety?
What do I know for sure? I'm pretty sure that I might not live to see the desired state of system, and I'm comfortable with it. And that's the thing, right? That's the thing about, especially now when I meet so many people who are fighting for change. Uh, you need to be comfortable. You need to know that the change that you wish to see,
You
you
might
might
not
not,
be able to see that.
you might not live that long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're not comfortable in it, you're not really fighting for change. What you're fighting is for that privilege
Yeah.
of the person who made that
Yeah.
decision. Right?
That in order to fulfill and feed into your ego that I
E-
made it possible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And and for me, that's something that I'm pretty sure. I think so. Even if you look at it from a startup unicorn, right? If you become a unicorn in Sri Lanka, you essentially account for more than 1% of GDP, right? Because our entire economy is about 89, million dollars, $1 billion. Um, so it's a long way. So a unicorn in Sri Lanka might not be $1 billion company.
Yeah.
It's something else. But the day that you do have $1 billion startup, I think that's fantastic. And that might take another 10 years. Obviously, it's with the company and all of that.
That's so
Uh,
profound. As I'm listening to you, the two people who are coming to my mind, one is Walt Disney
right.
and Mahatma Gandhi ji.
Okay.
And Walt Disney had this story where Walt Disney's wife was talking to two of the managers. And manager said that, hey, we are really sorry that Mr. Walt Disney is not here to see the beautiful creation that he has been instrumental in creating. He
Right.
said it's not possible because he saw it then. That is the reason why we are seeing it right now.
No.
So, Chalinda, if you were to give a piece of advice to your own 21-year-old self,
Right.
what would that be?
I'm very bad at giving advice. One of the things that I did initially, even with early days when we started, we borrowed a lot of things um, from the US. You always, and every country start by doing this, right? You want to create a Silicon Valley in your own thing. Um, and that, I believe that to be a bit naive looking back. My advice to my younger self would be, when I was 21, whatever, would be stop trying to copy something else and just spend more time trying to understand what is required here. Um, and I think, I always ask, or, the media always talks about whether it's Bill Gates or Elon Musk who being very, obsessed about creating the future, right? They always predict in the future. And when the pandemic happened, everybody started circulating Steve Jobs TED Talk saying that Steve Jobs predicted this 5 years ago. And if you really look at it, they're not different than us. They can't actually predict the future. They don't have a crystal ball or anything. It's because that they can't predict. They're trying to create their version of the future. That's that they're working for it, right? So it's very sad. Every individual has that power. If you, what is that ideal? That's what we do. Companies do 5-year plans, whatever. This is slightly more a step advanced. So what is that ideal state, and then work backwards and work with whatever. Because I think one of the things that I felt now that I go to universities, everybody is obsessed with being an entrepreneur, and they're looking at being an entrepreneur to shortcut or a short circuit that whole path, which is not the case.
Yeah,
You're probably gonna work this thing, and
yeah.
a lot of people get their hands burned.
They're
Um,
replacing an entrepreneur with being an employee.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they see it as a shortcut to success in life. But if you look at stuff like mental health, depression, all of these are very, very high among the entrepreneurial community, even though very few people talk about it, and I see it on a daily basis. So I wouldn't really promote entrepreneurship as the cool thing, you know but I mean, I guess I don't know how else you can build a ecosystem without
yeah.
doing.
Thank you so much, and that was absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
much of wisdom, so many learning nuggets for me to not only to talk about and share that with the rest of the world, but to actually imbibe it in my own life. So thank you so much. Absolute
Not a
pleasure
problem.
having you.
Thank you so much for inviting me and taking the time and reaching out and doing all of these things.